Hello and welcome to the Gaggle What We Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and I just want to record a short podcast on the rather startling news that emerged in the last day or so that the Trump administration is withholding some weapon systems from Ukraine on account of the cupboard, so to speak, becoming increasingly bare, and that the United States cannot afford to transfer weapon systems to Ukraine without denuding itself of vital means of defense. So, before we jump to any conclusions, um, we need to put this into some context because we have been here before, and particularly with Donald Trump. So, Donald Trump, within the first few days of his return to power, wanted to essentially cut weapons deliveries to Ukraine, and that lasted a few days, and then weapons system deliveries resumed to normal. So that was once, and then it happened again shortly after the disastrous meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office, and of course, famously during his first term, he decided not to um, deliver to Ukraine defense appropriations that Congress had voted on. And of course, this led to his first impeachment. So this would really be the fourth time that we have been here that Trump decided that he wants to withhold certain weapon systems from Ukraine. So that's why one has to be very careful about jumping to enormous conclusions, which I think a lot of people are doing, and saying, well, this is it. This is the beginning of the end. Clearly, the United States is pulling the plug, finally, after 3.5 years, pulling the plug on Ukraine, realizing that this is a hopeless endeavor, that America doesn't have enough weapons to go around, doesn't have the military industrial base to deliver the requisite number of weapons. And so, time to bring this war to an end. So, I think we should be very careful before we jump to that conclusion because we haven't heard any talk like this. In fact, the word is at the moment is that an assessment is being made as to what's in and what isn't in the U.S. inventory. And then after this assessment is made, then whatever decision as to how much and when to deliver to Ukraine will be made. So if there were really a move to bring this war to an end and essentially cut Ukraine off, I think we would be hearing about it. I think we'd be having indications from key figures in the administration that the time has come to sue for peace. But we're not hearing that, not at the moment. Again, this is a ongoing, it's a moving story, so we have to be tentative in the conclusions we draw. But what is apparent is that the United States has obviously expended quite a lot of ammunition and weapons, not just in Ukraine, but more recently in the Middle East. Weapons deliveries to Israel, which has been going on since October the 7th, 2023. The fight against the Houthis, which also involved U.S. expenditure of resources. And then, of course, the more recent war against Iran, sponsoring the Israelis in this fight against Iran. And then, of course, it's ongoing deliveries. I mean, it's never ending. all those weapon systems that Israel needs. So it's taking its toll. I mean, it's basically resources are not infinite. Um, so if we look at the stories that have appeared, that is where the administration is indicating the problem lies. That basically it's as things stand, the cupboard is bare. But we'll see whether that's in fact true or whether this might be some kind of a bait and switch operation. So here was this was the story that really revealed this uh, this change in policy. It was in Politico, and it says Pentagon halting some promised munitions for Ukraine, and the person they deem responsible is Elbridge Colby, who, as many of you will know, he's the the grandson of Bill Colby, who was, of course, a famous director of the CIA during the 1970s. The CIA director who revealed many of the worst, most embarrassing, most humiliating secrets of the CIA, such as the attempts to assassinate Castro and so on. And he was, not surprisingly, fired for his troubles by President Ford. So he was the grandfather of Elbridge Colby, and Colby had some difficulties um, getting through Congress because they, with some justice, felt that he is somebody definitely lukewarm on Ukraine. He's very much a hawk on China, very much gung ho on confronting China, but on Ukraine he was definitely a skeptic. So he had real difficulties getting through the nomination process. Anyway, the story is the Pentagon has halted shipments of some air defense missiles and other precision munitions to Ukraine due to worries that U.S. weapons stockpiles have fallen too low. The decision was driven by the Pentagon's policy chief, Elbridge Colby, and was made after a review of Pentagon munitions stockpiles, leading to concerns that the total number of artillery rounds, air defense missiles, and precision munitions was sinking. So that's the frame of the story. There's nothing here about the decision to bring this war to an end, that this is a hopeless war against Russia, that it doesn't make any sense to go on fighting this war of attrition on the European continent. It's just, or anything like that. It's strictly about the situation with the Pentagon munitions stockpiles. And the story goes on. The initial decision to withhold some aid promised during the Biden administration came in early June, according to the people, but is only taking effect now as Ukraine is beating back some of the largest Russian barrages of missiles and drones at civilian targets in Kiev and elsewhere. And then they say White House Deputy Press Secretary Anna Kelly said in a statement the decision was made to put America's interests first following a DoD review of our nation's military support and assistance to other countries across the globe. The strength of the United States Armed Forces remained unquestioned. Just ask Iran. So the nice couple of talking points there. Oh, it's America first, and hey, ask Iran. Boy, they got a good thumping. And then he goes on. They do want to have. Well, this is the quoting here, which is what makes the story a little unusual. Is that if you recall at the NATO summit last week, um, Trump was questioned by a somewhat emotional woman whose husband is fighting in Ukraine's armed forces as to what is he going to do for Ukraine. And Trump said that he wants to get some Patriot anti-missile systems to Ukraine. He's going to see if he can deliver that. But he said, well, they're a little hard done by. There's a big demand for these Patriot systems. Nonetheless, Trump said we're going to see if we can deliver them to Ukraine, which was quite a strong statement from him. In the past he had always sidestepped questions about arms deliveries for Ukraine. So this was quite explicit for him, saying yes, absolutely, we're going to deliver it to Ukraine, and specifically these Patriot anti-missile systems. But there's a big demand for them. And so that's why they say they do want to have these anti-missile missiles, as they call them, and we're going to see if we can make some available. They're very hard to get, Trump said. The decision by the Pentagon to hold some of the shipments stoked fears among Ukraine's allies in Congress, of course, that the country would be left vulnerable to further Russian airstrikes. Sorry. And here we have the munitions are a mix of air defenses and precision weapons that have been flowing to Ukraine for much of the 2+ years. Not sure why they're saying 2+ years. It's been 3 years now, but all right. The weapons are a mix of two different streams of support the U.S. has provided Ukraine, both under the Biden administration. Some come from drawdowns on current stockpiles. So those are, they're in the U.S. Armory, with the DoD receiving money to replenish those munitions. So once they're handed over to Ukraine, then the Pentagon gets to have those weapon systems replenished. And then the second comes from the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, in which the U.S. funds the purchase of weapons for Ukraine from American defense firms. So as you can see, both systems do not involve Ukraine actually spending any money at all. It's all coming courtesy of American taxpayers. The money has been used to put weapons under contract for the Ukrainian government. Money in the fund was all obligated by the end of the Biden administration, with deliveries coming whenever the systems are ready. The drawdowns from current stockpiles have continued under the Trump administration, which has been using up the last of the $61 billion in funding to replenish U.S. stocks of weapons and provide billions in aid for Israel and other partners. The Trump administration has not requested any further aid, though there is enough left from the Biden administration to last Ukraine several more months. So that's really has been the moment everyone's been waiting. Well, what happens when essentially all the drawdowns and everything has come to an end, and it will be time for Trump to seek a new appropriation for Ukraine? And Trump has kind of sidestepped answering that question, but it's obviously coming up quite soon. And then he goes, the move has echoes of the first Trump administration's withholding of $214 million in congressionally appropriated Ukraine security aid in 2019. The Government Accountability Office at the time ruled the move violated the Impoundment Control Act because policy disagreements aren't a lawful reason to block appropriated funds. Well, this is actually a very dubious constitutional shenanigans, because ultimately the President of the United States is tasked as the chief executive officer with all questions involving the national security of the United States. And if the president deems appropriations of military hardware for another country that might lead to the United States getting involved in a world war, then it is absolutely incumbent on the president as chief executive officer, as the person tasked under the Constitution with um, protecting the security of the United States. It's incumbent upon him to make that call and say that it is not in the national interest of the United States. It's not in the to the benefit of the security of the United States to be delivering weapons to be used against a nuclear superpower, which might lead to a world war with a nuclear superpower. So it was entirely within the discretion of the president to make that call as to whether this was in the United States national interest or not to deliver these weapon systems for Ukraine. And had Trump stuck to that line, he would not have been impeached. The problem arose is that Trump kind of put a block on the delivery of this appropriated funds for Ukraine, but then he changed his mind. So he first said, no, it's not in the interest of the United States to deliver all these weapon systems to Ukraine. But then he changed his mind. He said, "Oh, right, maybe we should just deliver that." By doing so, he gave credence to the allegation that the only reason he was withholding these appropriated funds for military hardware, the only reason he was withholding this was that Zelensky, who was only newly elected at that time, Zelensky was not cooperating with Trump in digging up dirt on the Biden family. And that by essentially taking the correct view that Trump did initially, was saying that I don't think this is in the interest of the United States. I mean, it was more than 240 million. It was more like $500 million, but that it's not in the interest of the United States to fuel a war with Russia using American military hardware. But by changing his mind and saying, "Oh yeah, I'm cool with that now," he essentially opened the door to the Democrats' move against him and saying, "Hey, you were just simply withholding money that was appropriated for this task. You were withholding it for no other reason than trying to extort Zelensky, trying to pressure him into digging up dirt against your political rival, Joe Biden." So that was the reason why Trump got himself into trouble. And then it says, if the Trump administration is allowing a freeze or slow walk of munitions Congress already funded based on Colby's policy review and without new budgetary message to Congress, it risks violating the same legal principles flag Ben. That really isn't correct, because if the hardware isn't there, then the hardware isn't there. You can't just simply conjure it out of thin air. It says basically that we don't have any Patriot anti-missile systems to spare when we don't have them to spare. You can't just invent them out of whole cloth overnight. And then this was the NBC News. And here's Pentagon holds weapons shipment to Ukraine amid concerns over U.S. stockpile. The move was made to put America's interest first. And then we have this Pete Hegseth has ordered a pause in sending a shipment of missiles and ammunition to Ukraine amid concerns about the U.S. military stockpiles. And then Hegseth ordered the delay weeks after he issued a memo ordering a review of the U.S. stockpile of munitions, which has been depleted after years of the United States sending weapons to Ukraine. as well as nearly 2 years of military operations in the Middle East, as the United States fought Houthi rebels in Yemen and defended Israel and allies against Iran. So that's kind of a good reason why stocks might be running a little low. And then the munitions and other weapons could be held up until the assessment is complete. And then the weapons being delayed include dozens of Patriot interceptors that can defend against incoming Russian missiles, thousands of 155 millimeter high explosive howitzer munitions, more than 100 Hellfire missiles, more than 250 precision guided missile systems, and dozens each of Stinger surface to air missiles. AIM air-to-air missiles and grenade launchers and so on. So that, whether that's an enormous amount, there's not an enormous amount. That's we can't yet tell. But obviously, Ukraine's allies are very distressed because they're always distressed unless you're sending just about everything that's in the cupboard. And of course, Ukraine purports to be very depressed. And then here's the New York Times. Trump pauses some weapons transfers to Ukraine. The White House cited Pentagon concerns that some American arms stockpiles were dwindling too low. And then it goes, the White House said on Tuesday that President Trump had paused the delivery of some air defense interceptors and precision-guided bombs and missiles to Ukraine. And remember, the air defense interceptors, this was also the issue with Israel, when it was under attack from Iran, that there came a point at which Israel was saying, we're running out of interceptors. So it seems to be an ongoing problem in the American empire. We're running short of these interceptor missiles. Included among the munitions being halted are interceptors for the Patriot air defense systems, precision artillery rounds and missiles that the Ukrainian Air Force fires from American-made F-16 jets. They have been critical weapons in Ukraine's efforts to hold off increasingly intense attacks from Russia at a particularly perilous moment in the 3 years and 4 months since Russia invaded. And then it was unclear how many weapons were included or how quickly the effect of the pause would be felt on the battleground. Some U.S. officials said on Tuesday that the munitions were not scheduled to be shipped to Ukraine for several months. Only last week, after meeting President Zelensky on the sidelines of a NATO meeting in The Hague, Mr. Trump said he was open to selling more weapons to Ukraine. But by that time, the pause was already being planned at the Pentagon. So the pause apparently was being planned without Trump being even informed about this. So Trump was just talking really without knowing what the planners of the Pentagon were thinking. And then some of those systems were scheduled for delivery to Ukraine over the next year or so. But the signal to President Putin may be that the United States is gradually getting out of its role as Ukraine's major supplier of advanced weaponry. Well, that's, of course, standard New York Times and foreign policy establishment hand-wringing, always this concern that Trump is getting out of this business of supporting Ukraine. Now, Trump has given no indication that he intends to get out of it. I mean, it's true that he's given all kinds of speeches, but in terms of practical decisions, he has done nothing to suggest. I mean, yes, he did twice during since January the 20th. Twice he put a very brief halt on arms deliveries on Ukraine, but they were really very brief. There was no real indication that Trump intended this to be a long-term policy, and that's why one has to be a little bit skeptical about these stories, because if this was coming together with some articulation of policy on the part of the administration saying, well, look, I think it's time to bring this war to an end, not just because we're running out of ammunition, but that it doesn't make a lot of sense to keep it going, then that would be one thing. Then we can say, yep, it's running short of hardware, and clearly it's time for a major strategic rethink. But without that, you have to be skeptical whether this really is uh, serious. And there's been no official announcement. No one has made these stories are all based on leaks from high level officials, and but no, there's been no formal announcement of a change in policy. Um, that in turn may encourage Mr. Putin to drag out talks about a ceasefire, figuring that the Ukrainian forces may soon be starved of ammunition and anti-missile systems. And of course, Putin has not been talking about a ceasefire. He's already laid out ad nauseum. We don't have to talk about now what are the conditions under which he would accept a ceasefire. So he's not dragging anything out. He's already said what are the conditions for Russia to accept a ceasefire. So this has nothing to do with weapon systems deliveries um, or not. Or at least not that. I mean, he talked about all deliveries, not just these particular systems. All NATO deliveries to Ukraine need to stop before he would accept a ceasefire. And then here's the Wall Street Journal. U.S. halts key weapons for Ukraine in new sign of weakening support for Kiev. See, always this anguish, tearing your hair out. New sign of weakening support for Kiev. And here it says the U.S. has stopped the delivery of air defense interceptors and other weapons intended for Ukraine and is using them instead to beef up Pentagon stocks. The U.S. move to withhold arms deliveries earmarked for Ukraine reflects the Trump administration's slackening commitment to aiding Kiev in its defense against Russia. So, why would anyone be thinking about replenishing Pentagon stocks? I mean, what a selfish, terrible thing to think about. The only thing that matters is Ukraine, nothing else. Ukraine is the only thing that matters. So whatever anyone's got, it's got to go to Ukraine. But see the contempt, beefing up Pentagon stocks. What a selfish thing to do. And then administration officials have stressed the need to focus more on the longer-term threats from China and more immediately military needs in the Middle East. And then Politico returned to the story today, and it says Trump administration military aid halt will only encourage Russia, Ukraine warns. Of course it does. And then here, Ukraine summoned a U.S. diplomat on Wednesday to explain the Pentagon's decision to withhold already agreed military aid that Kiev warned is positive news for Russia. Ukraine's foreign ministry called in John Ginkel, deputy chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, for talks. The ministry expressed gratitude for U.S. aid, but also discussed defense supplies and further contacts between Ukraine and the United States. And then NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte told Fox News that while he understood the U.S. need to safeguard its stockpiles, he warned in the short term, Ukraine cannot do without all the support it can get when it comes to ammunition and air defense systems. So, stockpiles be damned. Hand it all over to Ukraine. And then the first halt in arms aid to Ukraine happened in March. That's not true. It happened in January. The March one was the second, when Trump was trying to strong arm Kiev into negotiations with Russia. This time, the decision was driven by Elbridge Colby. After a review of Pentagon stockpiles, he raised concerns that the total number of artillery rounds, air defense missiles, and precision munitions was sinking. And then mentions, of course, Colby is a longtime critic of U.S. arming Ukraine. And it says some of the items being withheld are the missiles for the Patriot systems, precision artillery rounds, Hellfire missiles, and so on. And then Ukraine Defense Minister says Ukraine must maintain stability, continuity, and predictability in the provision of coordinated defense assistance. I mean, no talk anyway, in all the things that we've read, no discussion at all as to what is in the U.S. interest. The only thing that matters is, giving everything to Ukraine, but there's no discussion at any point what is in the U.S. interest. I mean, obviously, opening up your cupboard and giving everything away isn't really in the U.S. interest. Though you'd be hard put to find any media story that emphasizes this point, that you can't just hand everything over and then suddenly find that basically you've got nothing. And again, the U.S. interest is, well, why do we need to keep this war in Ukraine going in perpetuity? So none of these questions, of course, is ever asked. Anyway, the argument that the U.S. is running short of missile interceptors doesn't hold water. Says who? Said Siddharth Kaushal, a senior research fellow at London's Royal United Service Institute. So he says doesn't hold water. It says, while the U.S. has sent considerable number of Patriot interceptors to Ukraine, it has replenished stocks through buyback schemes from Japan, and more recent shipments were diverted from export customers rather than the Pentagon's own inventory, says Kaushal from the Royal United Services Institute. Well, if the Pentagon doesn't think it, then the Pentagon doesn't think it. It doesn't matter what some guy at a senior research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute says. Ultimately, it's the Pentagon chiefs who decide whether we've got enough anti-missile interceptors or not. The U.S. produces about a dozen Patriot systems a year, and its production of these intercept missiles surged by about 30% last year to around 500. That means inventory stockpiles are not critically low. I don't think that doesn't mean it at all. I don't think given how many have been given to Ukraine, given how many have been given to Israel, an awful lot has been given to Israel, given that the United States had been using them in its fighting against the Houthis, and God only knows who else received these interceptor missiles. These numbers aren't persuasive that, there's no shortage at all. Anyway, he goes on, they managed to find an expert. This is Politico, an expert who says, no problem at all here. The scarcity is relative and not absolute, and driven by increases on the demand rather than the supply side. Okay. And also, since initial diversions of Patriot came at the expense of export partners, including some in the Middle East, there may be a belief and indeed a contractual obligation to deliver interceptors to partners who are in some cases within range of Iranian these SRBMs. Well, yeah, that's exactly right. And then that's you can see here that the policymakers, or these think tank fellows, are all indignant, and naturally, the only conclusion they can come to is that Trump does not want to see Ukraine win. It's this has been said about him over and over again. He doesn't want to see Ukraine win, and he wants to withhold um, weapon systems. Now, as I said at the beginning, I think it's very early to draw too many conclusions. There's been no definitive statement on anything. There's been no definitive decision going forward as to that they really are going to cut back on these various weapon systems to Ukraine. So we have to wait and see, and I think we have to wait and see before we start jumping to conclusions that this is the beginning of the end, and that the United States is about to pull the plug on Ukraine, which in theory the United States was supposed to have done 3 years ago, and every few months we've been told that it's really, really going to happen this time. The United States will pull the plug on Ukraine. So we've got to be very careful about all of this. And I think the telltale sign so far is that there's been no indication from anyone within the administration, certainly not from Trump, given what he said last week at the NATO summit at The Hague, when he said about how much he enjoyed meeting Zelensky and that he intended to deliver Patriot missile systems to Zelensky, even though they're a little hard to come by, that there's been no decision made by the administration to bring this war to an end. It may come, but there hasn't been yet. So I think one needs to be cautious. One certainly needs to take note of this. But we have been here before. This will be the fourth time that Donald Trump would have made the decision to cut aid to Ukraine, and we'll have to see whether this is really the last positively definitive such Trumpian decision. I somehow doubt it. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me, and remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.